All right, here we go. This is our last lecture video on Chapter 7. I noticed that the last couple were pretty long, and that's mainly due to the quantity of calculations. That I wanted to go through some example calculations and really get into not just understanding the calculations, but understanding the why behind them and to show a couple ways to remember the calculations. So hopefully that helps. But this last video should be pretty quick, especially compared to those longer ones that were around 20 minutes or longer. This one should be pretty short and sweet. So this lecture is just going to look into investigating variances and benchmarking. So this is everything we went through in the last couple lectures, are breaking down the static budget variance into sales volume variance, and then into our flex budget variance. In our next set of lectures, we're going to really break down the sales volume variance into something like this, all the different components into a different hierarchy. But the last series, we went through this flex budget variance, broke it down into all its components, and learned how to calculate all those variances, and also did some examples of why those variances are important to look at, and some of the information you can get at by looking into those variances. So now we're going to kind of look at some of the rules of when you should really investigate variances, right? Because we always know that your actual is not going to equal your budget. It just never happens, right? So when do you see a variance and label that as an exception? Like that is an exceptional variance that we need to investigate. Wow. Handwriting is terrible, even worse on the iPad. So when do we break down and we look at these invariances? Well, the first thing we want to look at is the size of the variance, the absolute amount. Maybe for our company, an absolute amount of $1 million is a huge variance. We definitely want to look at that. Or maybe we're a relatively small company and even a $6,000 direct material variance. $6,000 is huge to us. So we really want to investigate that. So we kind of set a materiality threshold and we say, in general, any variance that is above some amount, we always want to investigate. So that's the absolute amount. Usually compare it to some sort of materiality amount. But there's also the relative amount. And what this means is, imagine we have a price and our budget price, direct labor price. We have budgeted $12,000 for the year. And our variance comes out to $4,000. So even if our materiality amount over here is $6,000, we might say $4,000, wow, relative to $12,000, that's a huge part. That's over 30% of our budget we were off by. So even though the absolute amount isn't huge, relative to what we thought, it's a really big amount. So we still likely want to investigate that. So absolute amount's important, but you also want to think relative to your expectation. Was the swing great enough that you want to investigate it? That way you have a better expectation in going forward for your next year's budget. A couple other things to think about is the cost benefit of investigating. So a lot of these, it's not cut and dry simple. You don't see that you have a direct materials variance of $10,000 and you go look and you see, oh, it's because we paid too much on this one contract. Imagine you're a multinational company and you have a $10 million direct material price variance, and you have to decide, is that absolute and relative amount worth it? Because to investigate this $10 million, we might have to go through thousands of contracts, and we might have to talk to our people in New York and our people in Mexico and our people in China, And it might cost a lot. We might have to send a whole team to Mexico to really dig in and find out the source of these variances. So a lot of times, even though it seems like pretty big amounts, it's going to cost us, say the variance was $50,000, it might cost us $200,000 to send a team down there to investigate. So you always have to do a quick cost-benefit analysis to make sure, hey, if we do find out about this variance and we can get it better, more accurate in the future, is that worth all that cost today? And this one is really important, that you don't just investigate unfavorable variances. A lot of people the intuition is, hey, if we got a favorable variance, let's just count that as good luck and let's move on. But if it's unfavorable, let's investigate it so we can fix it. But a lot of times there's really good information in favorable variances. So imagine our manufacturing facility in Mexico, they have some positive variance, a big favorable variance. We wouldn't want to just write that off as good luck. If we do a cost-benefit analysis and it seems like it could be relatively cheap to go investigate, we should send a team down there, because we might learn that that favorable variance came from something that we can implement in all our other facilities, right? So you can get really cool, good, useful information by investigating favorable variances. And that really allows you to not just make a more accurate budget in the future, but also maybe you can implement that or expand that throughout the rest of your company. So in general, these are kind of the overall rules to investigate variances. So the next thing we want to look at is benchmarking. So far we've talked about variances being our actual minus budget. But what it could also be used for is our actual minus some benchmark. And so one thing that companies always do is they benchmark against their competitors. In fact, when I was auditing a lot of my oil and gas clients, one of their main things, they had a whole team that after they did their financial reporting, they would go through and compare all their financial outcomes to those of about their 10 closest peers. And they could see, wow, our revenue was higher, but our expenses were lower. So our margin is really good. We're doing things very well compared to others. Or, our SG&A expenses are really high compared to all our peers. That's something we might want to investigate. So you can get a lot of useful information by benchmarking and creating variances that are between your company's actuals and other companies or your competitors' actuals. So a real quick example, assume that we're United Airlines and we get all our information at the year end, and we can calculate all this information from our competitors. We go to their 10Ks and we can calculate a lot of information from there. So the first thing we could do is look at our operating costs. We see ours is about 13 cents. And we look down and we see, compared to the average, our costs are a little higher. So maybe that's something to look at. And we could even look at a company like JetBlue and we can see, wow, maybe we should dig into their financials or try to figure out what they're doing to get this really low cost. Or maybe we look at our fuel costs and we see, okay, our fuel costs are a little higher than the average of the industry, but it's about the same. I don't know if you guys can hear Gus, but I think he sees a squirrel or something because he is going crazy. Anyway, sidetracked. So, by the way, just a reminder, Gus is the dog. So we look at our fuel costs. We see we're paying a little more, but we could dig in and look at these couple companies. We see, wow, they're paying a lot less in fuel. So maybe we can look in, see who their contracts are with. We can get a lot of information to try to replicate that. Or vice versa. Maybe we look at things like our revenue and we say, okay, our revenue compared to the average and a lot of our peers is pretty dang good. So what can we do to maintain that competitive advantage? Again, overall, this is just a procedure. Benchmarking, looking at variances, is just a procedure to try to gather useful information. So all that's left is another practice problem. I'll let you guys work through this on your own. And just as before, all the practice problems, the solutions will be at the end of the slides. So far in all these lectures, we've looked at this side of the static budget variance. In the next lecture series, we're going to focus over here on the sales volume variance. And we're going to develop a whole nother hierarchy tree for the sales volume variance. So that's it. Don't forget to do the homework. It's due according to the class schedule. And please remember to work through all the practice problems that you see in the lectures, and those solutions will be posted in the lecture slides on Canvas. All right, thanks a lot, guys. We'll see you in the next series.